there's a saying, if you criticize him, something happens. Like, could you imagine like Sky Sports or Roy Keane, toning it down because he's scared? Do you see Roy Keane being scared? Or
I think, first of all, I don't think Roy Keane will be scared of them, because I can't believe that man's scared of anything.
Hi guys, and welcome to the Whipping It In podcast, the podcast you didn't ask for. And today we're going to be talking about the new Newcastle owners, Mohammad Bin Salman and the Saudi group. Today we have a new guest, actually. Do you want to introduce yourself, mate?
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Joe. I'm a Wycombe Wanderers supporter living in Birmingham at the moment. I've known Naz for about 4 or 5 years now. And we've
six now. Six. It's been six,
yep.
Yeah.
Played with Lewis as well. So I know their varying levels of ability as footballers. Dare I say it, I'm just as bad. So yeah, I'm looking forward to taking part.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast. Welcome.
Good to have you on, man. Good to have you on.
Cool. So we'll start off by talking about Newcastle and saying, is this the upgrade that they've needed? Because the way I kind of viewed Newcastle is like the Snorlax of football. So they've always been that sort of sleeping giant, that sort of big team in the background. They've never been in focus. They've always been a really good team, a bogey team in some ways. But for me, they've always needed that step up. And I think maybe this acquisition from the Saudis could be a promising prospect. They've got a massive stadium, 52,000. They've been runners-up in the Premier League in the 96-97. They've won 6 FA Cups. So I feel like they've always been potentially a bit, that team that can go to their next level. But how do you guys feel?
I very much agree with Newcastle are a sleeping giant. They are too big a club to be looking at only staying in the Premier League and spending small amounts of money. Although Nas mentioned 6-time FA Cup winner, the last time they won the FA Cup was the 1955 season. So they haven't won trophies in a long, long time. For a club of that size, that's not really acceptable. They almost seem like they haven't been trying. They haven't got beyond round 4 of the FA Cup since 2005. They haven't got beyond round 5 of the League Cup since 76. They are a big club, but they're big because of their supporter base, and they're big because of their history. But in terms of trophy winning at the minute, then they're not up there. And this, like Naz was saying, could be the upgrade they need to start to challenge for things.
I like that argument, but then you also think about like relegation and like like Newcastle Championship and Premier League. So is survival of the Premier League also a trophy for them? Because more emphasis on the Premier League rather than like the cups, like especially the Carling Cup. You look at Man City, they keep on winning it. Is it just money? Is it just an opportunity for smaller clubs to get revenue? And a lot of clubs are looking at to displace the Carling Cup now. So just arguing whether Newcastle being putting more emphasis on the Premier League rather than like cup.
With more money, Newcastle should be at a level of at least an Everton or something like that. They shouldn't be a club scrapping for survival. They certainly shouldn't be a club in the Championship. Like Naz says, they are a giant. They are a sleeping giant. So yes, Premier League survival is of course most important, but they should be aiming beyond that as a club.
The point about Mike Ashley. So he came in around about 2007. Came in through. First, he bought around 40% of the shares, and slowly started gaining a majority shareholder or a majority stake. And ever since he came in, he's actually tried to sell the club 3 times already, and each time he's been unsuccessful. So this isn't the first time that he's tried to get rid of Newcastle Football Club. And if you speak to any of the Newcastle fans, you can hear the same thing, that they're just not getting the investment or the right managerial decisions being brought in, or sometimes managers who are doing well are getting sacked too early sometimes. So there's always been a level of criticism aimed at Mike Ashley, and he hasn't painted himself in a helpful light either, So ever since he came in, there was that first controversy of him drinking beer out on the alcohol pitch when he wasn't allowed to, or something like that. Ever since then, it's just been like a down spiral. In an interview in 2016, Mike actually even said that he regretted buying Newcastle United. So, imagine the owner saying, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't have bought you." a lot of his policies just haven't gone down well. Even amidst all the Premier League being on suspension and questions over next season, he still charged fans for next season's season tickets, which was never going to be a popular move when next season might not even happen. Sure, Newcastle are very happy to be rid of him, but then it's like who they're bringing in to replace him. You know what I mean?
I just want to go on to some of the deals that Newcastle have done, and going back to the point that they're like a sleeping giant. So some of the things in terms of football deals, they have bought Shearer on a world record free transfer at 15 million when nobody expected them to spend so much, and they've always been that team that can do it, but they haven't done it consecutively. Is there any sort of deals that they've done you guys want to highlight?
This season, they actually made their record signing, Joe Linton from Hoffenheim, for around 40 million. His return has not been very good. 1 goal in 25 appearances. Michael Owen, remember when he came back from Real Madrid? Wasn't the best of stints ever. It might have been more of a crowd draw, just to say oh hey, we have Michael Owen, as opposed to getting Michael Owen for his footballing abilities, because Michael Owen that came back from Real Madrid was not the same one that went there. He was riddled with injuries, probably wasn't a good buy. Other notable signings, you've got things like Gigi Wijnaldum, who was obviously now bossing it for Liverpool. You've got Shearer, Miguel Almiron as well. So there's a few guys who, there are very notable names there.
With Wijnaldum, the return they got really was money, because they only had him a season, but they sold him to Liverpool for 10 million more than they bought him from PSV. Mitrovic actually surprised me. I never thought they gave him enough of a chance. That transfer was a strange one, but they did manage to gain 10 million on him. And of course, they sold Andy Carroll for 35 to Liverpool, which I'm sure you Liverpool fans don't need reminding. And in terms of Shearer, it was a world record at the time, or an English record at the time. This is over 20 years ago, and I think with Shearer, the fact it's his hometown club maybe attracted him there as much as the fact the club's big.
But then that comes to the question of is it going to be difficult for Newcastle to attract players to Newcastle? Because I think most players don't want to go to Manchester, London. So even with the extra money, is it going to be difficult for Newcastle to bring in the players, to attract the players?
If you guys remember Man City when they first sort of started buying 7 strikers, Neo and then Benjani and then all of Adebayor in one team. When you think about it, it was purely money based. It's only the term's mercenary, isn't it? But how many players are actually going to Newcastle?
I think it will depend on money, and also I think it will depend on who they're playing for. Because with respect to Steve Bruce, I don't know how many world class or perhaps that bracket below world class players will want to come and play for him.
No, I think there's been rumours of Pochettino being Newcastle manager. So if he comes in, I'm sure he's going to bring a lot of good players in. But that's if Pochettino becomes manager.
If I were Newcastle's owners, I would throw all the money at Pochettino to try and get him as manager.
If you want to draw comparisons to when Man City's Arab owners first came in, if you look at their first sort of transfer season, Robinho is really the only big name they had in their first season under the Arab owners. And even when Robinho came in, it was more of a mercenary signing rather than, yes, we've got this world-class star. Obviously, he was a talent, but it wasn't someone that was going to set the team alight just by himself. If you look at the rest of the signings, you've got Nigel de Jong, Craig Bellamy, Wayne Bridge, Paulo Zabaleta, and Vincent Kompany. Obviously not the Kompany today, but take Robinho out and imagine if somebody said you're going to play in a team with de Jong, Bellamy, Bridge. You're not exactly going to be over the moon about it, because one, those guys haven't reached their peak yet, or if they ever did, and two, they're not the world-class side that you see Man City in now. So it took a while for Man City to start drawing in the likes of David Silva, who they got in 2010, or Sergio Aguero, who they got the year after that. So it's going to be a few years of just getting these, I don't want to call them, but sort of mercenary type players. People like Robinho, Tevez, Adebayor, level just underneath world-class players, but who want a big paycheck. So they're going to have to accumulate a lot of those just so then they can have a good team to then attract the higher caliber of players. Because without sort of Robinho being there, if you went to Carlos Tevez or Emmanuel Adebayor and said, hey, we've got Nigel de Jong, do you want to come play for us? Who's going to say yes? But then if you say look, we've got David Silva, we've got Sergio Aguero. Now do you want to come play for us? Everybody be chomping at the bit.
The big thing is getting the club into Europe as well, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Once they can deliver at least Europa League, preferably Champions League, they become a more attractive option for players.
I think players that are sort of development players, because when I think of what Guardiola's done at Man City, it's not. Yes, he's bought these 50 million pound players, but it's players that can still be developed. So I don't think it's just so much all mercenary. I think if it's a good coach, and let's say, for example, Pochettino comes in somehow, and he's looking at towards buying players, let's say from his ex-club, Dele Alli, instead of Harry Kane. Dele Alli is still a quality player. He still can. He's got that potential. He's dipped a bit, I'm not going to lie, but these type of players where you can buy for 50 million and you can train them up, develop them, they'll become much, nice prospect. Like you look at, for example, Sterling when he went to City, he wasn't the finished article that he is today. Like the fact that he can come on the wing, bought for 50 million, Guardiola's arguably developed him to this sort of level where he's seen as this world-class player. And I think there's so many players that are there in the market that are still, in the middle, but they've got that potential to go up. Do you guys see that as well in terms of not just looking at mercenaries, but looking at as well as players that are looking towards development and their career progressions? In
terms of player recruitment, is buying players so you can buy more players, if that makes sense. If you just come back to City now, say if you buy someone like, take Rubinho, for instance. So because he's Brazilian, something like that, they now have that sentence to do negotiations to say, look, we've got other Brazilians on the team. So then any further Brazilians who want to resign. But 2008, Brazil was still a very good national team. They could say, look, we can settle you in with Rubinho. You'll have a friend there. You're not going to be alone. So that's going to be a draw for some players as well.
And they've got quite a diversity in their team at the minute, albeit not big names. But the average age of their side at the moment's a concern. So, like as I was saying, they do need to be investing in some up-and-coming players as well. Because I was looking at their last starting 11 before when they last played, over a month ago now. One player was under 25 in it. Two over 30, but they're all in that sort of bracket of late 20s, most of their squad. It's a good time to be able to do an overhaul of players, but like I said, they do need some more younger players to be coming through, and whether the young players they have at the minute will be good enough for this ambition that the owners may have, I don't know.
I think that stems to the point of whether Steve Bruce, his job was to survival, so he needed more experienced players like John Joe Shelby, people been in, fighting for relegation already, Matt Ritchie, all these players. So it's kind of like if the new owners do come into place, it's kind of new perspective change. So they go from relegation up to mid-table, and then from then they kick on. I think it's not a 1 or 2 year plan. It's maybe like a Man City 10, 15 year plan where you see. Also, you got into the factor of financial fair play. For example, Newcastle can't keep buying these players for 10, 15 million, all over the income generating coming in. So it's really just about sustained income, seeing where they just progressively improve and keep improving the team. So get them from relegation to top 10. Yeah, that's how I see it. But also with points like Pochettino, you look at Southampton days. So he brought in Virgil van Dijk, Mane. So maybe he could do something similar for Newcastle.
What they really want to target is the sort of sweet spot where players are just a year or two away from their actual prime. So in that sort of maybe 21 to 24, 25 range. If you look at Man City's top signings, when they bought them, most of them are between 20 and 25. Kevin De Bruyne, 24, Rodri, the defensive midfielder, 23, Cancelo, 25, Laporte, 23, Sterling, 20, but Sterling had a couple of years in the Premier League already, and he had a full season after Suarez to be the main man for Liverpool, so that probably prompted them to purchase early. So they want to just aim for that little sweet spot of kind of that area around 20 to 25. And then with a coach like Pochettino, to sort of nurture them, help them find their groove, and just let them do their thing.
I think we'll jump on to the controversial topic, talking about the background of the new Saudi owner. So his name is Mohammad Bin Salman, and he wanted to purchase Manchester United, but the Glazers refused. they didn't want to sell the club. So he looked at Newcastle, as you do, the second best option. And from looking at that, there's been a few sort of reports and investigations in regards to him as a person. Something that comes into mind is his ruthlessness. So with his family members, I think his uncle was in line for the throne, and he's basically taken his power and his wealth away. And he's done that to a lot of his uncles and sort of business people in Saudi, which shows that when needed, he can get the job done. When he needs to play that power game, if you'd like, he's able to do that. As well, they make 90% of their money from the oil industry, which now they want to move away from. And I've been looking at their 2030 plans, where they want to look towards increasing tourism by sort of moving away from the oil sector and going into sort of building facilities, cinemas, parks in the area. And most recently is the development of like sporting events. So Anthony Joshua versus Ruiz was fought in Saudi Arabia, and that's a way to increase tourism. I think you describe him as sort of liberal Muslim. He's not sort of that strict, rigid, as you know, as perceived people have seen. He's more sort of open to the audience. So I guess I'll kick off with you, Lewis. So how do you see the background of this Saudi owner? Is there anything controversial about him? Do you think that there's a saying, you know, if you criticize him, you know, something happens? Like, could you imagine like Sky Sports or Roy Keane, toning it down because he's scared? Do you see Roy Keane being scared? Or
controversies? There's a lot like surrounding the Saudi owners and the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia. I think it is. There's that investment group that are investing into Newcastle. So they're owning 80%, and then the Reuben brothers, so like they got the 20%. So I think a lot of like charities such as the Amnesty Fund, the ethics of how the Saudi Arabia Fund treats its workers. For example, a lot of workers, especially for the dying, and then the Amnesty Fund have raised this up and said this isn't right, and then they brought it up to the Premier League. That was like last week, but I think more recently, I think the Premier League are going to allow the deal to happen. Amnesty Fund and Amnesty International are going to appeal to the Premier League, or are they going to let it slide? So in terms of that, like they got a lot of controversies in terms of workers and slavery. I think that was one of the big reasons why the deal might not happen.
I think, first of all, I don't think Roy Keane will be scared of them, because I can't believe that man's scared of anything. As and when this does come around. The term that kept coming up when I was Googling this was sports washing. And that's basically where they try to do hosting sporting events or owning sports clubs to try and improve a reputation of a group or a place, despite a terrible human rights record. And this is like, say, the World Cup happening in Qatar or Russia, or the Grand Prix in Bahrain all the time. And that's basically what Amnesty International were saying here. They're saying that this is all this is. Now these guys own Newcastle. They're trying a way to try and improve Saudi Arabia's reputation, and the Premier League should maybe care a bit more, as it were, about the dreadful human rights record. The trouble is with it being football, they're not going to care, because you get many clubs that are owned by people that are from these sorts of states that do have very poor human rights records. You have, as I've already mentioned, the World Cups being hosted in places with these terrible records. So I don't think Amnesty International making a statement to the Premier League is going to mean anything. Whether Newcastle fans want their club owned by people that have the record that these guys do, I don't know. But ultimately, when it comes to football, I think people tend to forget if they're winning games. So I don't think this will be talked about once they take over the club and give it 6 months or so. I don't think it'll even be discussed.
Survey done on 3,000 people from the Newcastle Supporters Trust, whether they'd be in favour of the proposed takeover. 96.7% of them were actually in favour. So I'm not sure.
Is it the takeover they're in favour of, or is it anything to do with this group's history, as it were?
I think it's the takeover there, info. So I was just going to say, I'm not sure whether the survey was done before or after all the news has come out about their human rights issues and things like that. I want to talk about other sort of so potential barriers to takeovers. So Sheffield United is owned by Prince Abdullah, I believe, and he has relations with Mohammed Bin Salman. So one of the key criteria to being an eligible owner of a Premier League club is that you don't have influence over other clubs. Now, knowing what we know about Bin Salman, if he's like that, kind of like that bully figure, like, you know, that kind of like gets what he wants type of guy. If he's like that, and say, you know, Sheffield United have a player that Newcastle want, then could he just, you know, flex his influence and make Sheffield United essentially just his second club, or, you know, and do whatever he wants just because he controls the owner? So there's, like, you know, a lot of question marks surrounding that, and the Premier League strictly forbids, like, you know, having any influence over other clubs other than the one you own. Then obviously this would be in direct breach of that. He's also got good relationships with the Man City owner as well. So there's a lot of, like, you know, barriers, potential barriers there from a footballing perspective that might stop this takeover from happening. And in addition to the other human rights issues and everything that you mentioned. So there's a lot of things.
There's a place next to Versailles that he bought, like the world's most expensive house. And then there was a famous painting he purchased, 500 million. So it's not like, you know, he has trouble spending. In terms of sort of, I want to just go back in terms of like other foreign owners, and I just want to look at sort of how Roman Abramovich kind of changed the way money was spent in the Premier League, like, or even the Man City owners. They always said they're going to get bored and they're going to leave. Because the way I see it is he's quite an impatient person. He kind of gets things done whenever, chops and changes things. Do you see there's a long-term vision for Newcastle as a city, as a place in terms of development as a whole? I'll sort of start with you, Joe.
I mean, you would like to think there will be additional investment going into the city itself to help rejuvenate it. That happened in Manchester quite a lot. There was a huge project at Manchester Airport that was sort of tied in with when Sheikh Mansour came to Man City. Whether this will happen or not, only time will tell. I think that will be finalised when the takeover of the club is finalised, and then they'll start to look into how they reach out to the community and stuff like that.
So just to mention some of the community work that Newcastle does do, and it might be an entry point for the new owners to hit the ground running if they can continue this good work. So in 2008, there was the Newcastle United Foundation set up that was designed to promote learning and healthy living among disadvantaged people. So youth, elderly, those who, you know, are not that well off. And further to that, in 2012, Newcastle became the first carbon positive club. So the amount of carbon they offset was more than the amount of carbon they emit, or something like that. It's a good thing for the environment, you know, to be green, so to speak. So there are a couple of projects in place already in Newcastle for the owners to pick up and hopefully expand on. And just
in terms of geographic location, so like Newcastle is in the northeast of like UK. There's not many clubs around that area, the Premier League clubs. So I think you've got like nearest club is Manchester United, which is 2.5 hours away, and then other clubs around it, so like Middlesbrough, Sunderland, Carlisle. So I understand why like the Saudi fund have chosen Newcastle, because if you look at other areas such as like London or Manchester, they're oversaturated with like rich owners already. Like you got Man City, United, and London with Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham. So there's a really interesting opportunity for like Saudi Arabia to go into the Premier League market, and so it's even more enticing for the Saudi Arabia fund to look into Newcastle and look into potentially investing in the area.
But you know, in Newcastle, it is a one team city. So yeah, if the team is flying, of course people are gonna feel better about it. But actually, it being a one team city and the entire area, as Lewis was saying, although I think closer than Manchester would be the Yorkshire clubs. it being the only real club for quite a distance. You know, you have Sunderland stuck down in League One, sort of with Wycombe Wanderers and teams like that.
We can't see anything in the background.
No, not at all. Newcastle are the big club in the area. That's why they have such a large supporter base. And that is what the owners will be looking to tap into.
And you guys give your opinion, but I'll chuck in mine. And for football clubs, I think the most important thing when I think about it is having a director of football is the most important aspect. Like it shows the vision of the club. So, for example, when Chelsea looked into going into the youth side of things, when we bought, the likes of De Bruyne, Lukaku, Salah, Hazard, Oscar, even Juan Mata to an extent, like those sort of players, these young and up-and-coming talents. There was Emanalo, so our director of football, who looked into finding these type of players. Look, that's what I feel is important. You look at, for example, Borussia Dortmund as well. There's a style of football there. It's not like they're going to play this defensive rubbish, you know. When there's, I feel like a director of football, there's a way of playing. Even you look at Atletico Madrid, there's a style. Okay, the manager's seen as a positive impact on it, but there is a director of football there. So I feel like that's a possible avenue for Newcastle to start with. I think director of football is important. There's one that comes into mind is Luis Campos. So he was the director of football at Monaco when they first found the players like Bernardo Silva, Mbappe, Bakayoko. That team was really exciting. And now he's gone to, I believe, Lyon, where they brought back Memphis Depay, but they've had some really good quality players as well. So that's where I feel like they could start. Where do you guys think? Do you think, do you disagree with me? Do you think manager should be a start? Where do you think?
I think there's no point having a director of football if the manager is going to clash with him. They would need to make the appointments. If they're going to go down that route, they would need the appointments at the same time, or with two people that would complement each other in that way. I know Pochettino didn't like at Spurs that he didn't feel he was making all the decisions. And if he was to come in at Newcastle, he would either not want a director of football or want a director of football that has his same vision. So I think getting a director of football could be brilliant, but it could also be dangerous for that reason. I would be looking on the pitch. They need goals. That's the big thing Newcastle need. They have scored 25 goals this season in 29 games. Yeah, that is shockingly low. They have a striker that they signed for 40 million that Steve Bruce said isn't the sort of striker that scores goals, which is useless.
Or is he Firmino?
If he had Firmino's ability, then fine. But even then, Joe Linton is shocking. You've got Andy Caroll, who is a sick note, basically. Well, Dwight Gale, who's a fantastic championship striker, but has never made anything work in the Premier League. And they've got someone called Muto. I didn't know existed till I was researching for this podcast, but has scored one goal this season. You know, Joe Linton, Caroll, Muto and Gale, between them, 4 goals. Almiron scored 6.
So at least one of their signings worked.
Yeah, one did.
Right.
Because the defence, okay, it's not perfect, but it's not a bad defence at the moment. You throw in someone that can score goals, that's already going to add a little bit to the team, and that will make a big difference. So on the pitch, that's where they need to start for me.
I'm probably jumping ahead of the game, but like, what play would you suggest? Like, can realistically Newcastle acquire?
Well, I had a look through the rumours. Some amazing names are in there. Honestly, people, and they're going to sign Griezmann and Mbappe. You know, obviously they won't. Not at this point. They're quite heavily linked with Morelos from Rangers. Now, whether that would be a good move or not, I don't know. As Rafa Silva, the Portuguese attacking mid, his returns 24 goals in 72 games. That's a very solid rate, especially for attacking midfielder. Possibility. I know I've just named midfielders after saying they need a striker, but should Villa go down, whether Newcastle would go in the market for Jack Grealish?
I think everyone's linked with Grealish.
Everyone's
No, only one can sign him.
That's even if Aston Villa stay up. But because Pochettino is the main man linked with a managerial change, if takeover goes through and things like that, in that scenario, you'd probably say go raid Tottenham. How successful that would be, I don't know, because Mourinho really likes Dele Alli, and the way he sets his team up is for Dele Alli to be the main star as opposed to Harry Kane. Even though Harry Kane still gets his goals, he scored a couple under Mourinho's regime. Dele Alli has mainly been the star man. And obviously, you've got like Heung-min Son and things like that. But for Newcastle, what I'd probably say is get players so then you can get more players. Because at the moment, imagine if they went for Mbappe and they said, okay, do you want to play with Joe Linton up top? You know, Mbappe's not going to be leaving Paris anytime soon because they will Joe Linton. If they can, perhaps raid, say if they can get Jack Grealish, say if they can get another striker from the Prem, maybe someone like, even if they didn't manage to get Dele Alli or, top strikers, so then it's a more enticing prospect to play with than Joe Linton. So then, they just slowly move their way up in terms of player ranking. So it's not as if like you buy Mbappe and he has to do all the work for 10 people. And then you got like, I don't know, Matty Longstaff playing through balls to him.
I think they're at least 3 or 4 seasons away from being able to get a Griezmann or an Mbappe. They would need to be a Champions League club before that could happen.
So as a Liverpool fan, I go back to like Nan said, director of football. So when I think of director of football, I think of Damien Caroll for Liverpool, and then that's the worst case scenario. So for example, like Liverpool, they've brought in like Andy Carroll for 35 million, Jordan Henderson 16 million, Charlie Adam 8 million, Stuart Downing. He all authorised these transfers, but they weren't the transfers that Kenny Dalglish was looking at. So that comes into the question of you need unison between your director of football and your manager. Like Joe was saying about Pochettino, he doesn't have the same type of thought process as the director of football, and that's why ultimately he might have left. That might be one of the reasons why he left, or he was forced out. That's one thing that Newcastle must get right at the beginning, because it could put them down like a few seasons. For example, like Liverpool, there's a few rough seasons for us Liverpool fans. We were like 1 or 2 seasons where we ran on Charlie Adam, and then Stuart Downing, Jay Spearing. Newcastle need to get it right if they're going to operate the director of football. So I get on to the second point. So like in terms of like transfers, everyone said it's a rebuilding process. It's not a 1 or 2 season rebuild. It's a 5-10 season rebuild where you're looking to gradually improve your players. Maybe Cavani may want to go into the Newcastle Premier League, so go to Newcastle because I think his contract's ending as well. Anything can happen, man, with Newcastle's money, wage bills.
The two most toughest business people I think are one, the Napoli director of football, and Daniel Levy. They're really tough to buy players off them. Very difficult to do, and even if you do, it's like you're paying beyond the odds. Because Rahat, you mentioned to raid Tottenham. I think it's going to be difficult. I don't think it's as easy if Pochettino was to come just to raid them. And then Joe, the point that you made that they could get a top player, and I guess established players are Tottenham when you're looking at it, and the club's in a bit of disarray with Mourinho, and some of them are unhappy with his sort of style. Do you think that that strategy could work, looking into buying these type of players from ready-made players, or should they look at Lewis's idea of taking the long term? But when you're looking at the league table, they're 35 points. So I think 8 points above the relegation spot. It's looking Newcastle is safe for this season.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think you need to look at both. They won't be able to go out and immediately sign a world-class player. They wouldn't stand a chance of getting Harry Kane without Pochettino. Even with him, I think it's a very, very, very slim chance. But they do need to be looking at signing a better quality of player. Because they're doing that now doesn't mean they're not looking at long-term. I mean, we go to Roman Abramovich. When he first came in at Chelsea, albeit they were in a better position than Newcastle currently are, his first summer, he went and signed Crespo, Makelele, Damien Duff. They had different levels of success, but they were relatively big signings of different types, be it a big international signing or a signing who had done well in the Premier League. I don't know if Newcastle could attract players that big, but they would need to go out and get someone better. Because I've been waiting to bring these up. Also, the nightmare scenario of the foreign owner is the Venky's group, for example, who came into Blackburn Rovers. And they had this thing as well. They were I went back and looked at it. There were rumour pages of them being ready to sign Ronaldinho or sign David Beckham. Instead, they went out, they bought 10 players for a combined roughly 20 million. One signing worked pretty well, the rest didn't. They got rid of Big Sam, brought in Steve Keane, and Blackburn Rovers went into complete disarray. So that's what can happen when the foreign owners come in. They can absolutely mess things up if they don't get things right. So I don't think you can just look to the future. I think they have to make some signings for now as well.
I just want to come up to the final point is signings that Newcastle can make and future. No one thought at the time Neymar was going to happen. Everyone was still in disarray. That 200 million for a player agents that will chuck in, such as Riola, Pogba, for example. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but Pogba's unhappy. It's something with a good offer and Riola happy, he could go to Newcastle.
One realistic signing is going to be Danny Rose. I think he's on loan at the moment at Tottenham, so he's going to make that permanently. So I'm thinking more realistically, like Danny Rose is going to permanently move to Newcastle. And he said he likes moving to Newcastle, and this could be a springboard to bring in to Aber.
Because of the fish and chips, isn't it?
Yeah, fish and chips. He said London fish and chips. Yeah, like there's a lot of Gregs in Newcastle, man. A lot of Gregs. Yeah.
Always with a queue out the door.
All of them. I went to Newcastle. There's like several on the high street. It's crazy, man. Like 3 or 4. Always with a queue. Yeah. So in terms of like Danny Rose, I think in the short term you're gonna get like similar ability levels to like Danny Rose. So how the upgrade is gonna be through Danny Rose type players who are looking for a new project, I would say. So like so maybe we see similar levels like players Liverpool. So maybe Lallana might think of moving to Newcastle. They're looking to move, or we could get rid of Lord Karius as well. Maybe Karius might want to go to Newcastle. If Newcastle give us like 5 million, yeah, just give him for free. Just take him, yeah. But I think it's really like similar level players to Danny Rose that Newcastle are looking towards like buying or loaning.
I've seen this morning, James Rodriguez linked with Newcastle and Everton. I don't think that's impossible. I think it's a stretch, but I don't think it's impossible. I think it's certainly more likely than Pogba.
So with this takeover now, every player in the top 50 Ballon d'Or has been linked with Newcastle at some point, ever since these takeover rumours have occurred. So everybody's looking at this top 50. But the reality is, without Champions League and without a good supporting cast, none of these top 50 are going to still be interested because they can get money and Champions League over at other clubs, you know, like whatever Newcastle offer, Paris can just better it. And where would you want to live for a year, Paris or Newcastle, you know? So what they really going to have to aim for is, I know this is very general, but probably imagine if like the list of footballers went down to like 400, 500, they probably have to aim for like between 100 and 150 of like the best footballers. Aim for that sort of bracket and then slowly work their way up. If there's a mercenary in the 50 to 100 bracket of the world's best players, and there probably will be, you know, just to draw on some examples before, Robinho, he's kind of that player, chased the paycheck. Adebayo just went wherever money was. So did Tevez, things like that. So they have to aim for, you know, 100 to 150, that caliber of player. And then once they start accumulating a lot of those, then they can start attracting the higher caliber players and then move their way up to the ladder. And then they can finally start being a realistic prospect. So the top 50 players were listed in the Ballon d'Or. And hopefully by that time, I don't want to hope, but Newcastle fans would hope that they'd get Champions League. And then that's another draw for them.
Do you think there's that trouble of Newcastle falling down the line of Everton? Do you think there's that issue that they'll sign these sort of 40 these are sort of, when you think about it, they are sort of still following that Man City mold, but it's not as good as Man City, obviously, but that 40 million mold of a player that's still in the early stages but can be developed. Do you think there's a scare that Newcastle, they'll sign these players, but then there won't be anyone to develop them or any progression if they don't get the correct staffing? Do you think that could be a scare for Newcastle fans as well?
It could be. I would say with Everton, they had, in my opinion, one of the biggest fraud managers the Premier League's had in probably the last decade in Marco Silva, who was very highly rated, but I can't for the life of me work out how or why. And he made some poor signings. I don't think if Newcastle got the right man in, I don't think they will do that. And with Carlo Ancelotti, I think Everton will be spending their money a bit more wisely now. So I think it's that more than anything. It's the case of why they spent a lot of money on very average players.
No, I think Everton, like, they went through a lot of Barcelona academy players. So, like, they got Lucas Digne, Angel Gomez. So I think maybe this could be a possible route for Newcastle to enter into. So looking at other like squad players of like big clubs such as Barcelona, so you can find Lucas Digne or an Angel Gomez. So I think that might be something that Newcastle would look into and try to replicate Everton's model to find these like Lucas Digne, because I think Lucas Digne is a much better player than like the top 8 side. So maybe go to a bigger side than Everton.
Maybe they'll target a lot of these. I can't think of a better word. Maybe just like top club rejects, if you think about it, like players who like Andre Gomez, or Digne, or if you remember
James Rodriguez, isn't it, to an extent? Sorry.
Yeah, James Rodriguez, for instance. Do you remember Stoke kept signing everybody who Barcelona didn't play? They bought Bojan, they bought Mark Muniesa, they bought Affile. They bought Ibrahim Affile. So like, you know, they might just go around this route of just buying rejects from top clubs and be like, you know, hey, we've got some Barcelona players here, you know. But then the Barcelona players like played 5 times and didn't score ever, you know. So it's going to take a while for them to get right. I mean, even with Man City, like, you know, they have to go through the likes of Joe, Elano, Benjani before they can get to Aguero. So it's going to be a tough couple of years anyway.
One final point on Newcastle. They have a big advantage in St James's Park. It's a huge stadium, and when that is full of Geordies, that can be really, really noisy. And if they can make that a fortress, that's a huge advantage already.
Cool. So I think that wraps it up for the podcast. There you have it, audience. It looks like Mbappe is coming to Newcastle. James Rodriguez, all of these players. But yeah, comment, like, subscribe to the channel. Yeah, so thank you for listening.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks, Joe, for coming on. Big ups Hatem Ben Arthur, my favorite Newcastle player.
Hope you enjoyed listening.
Guys, thanks for having me on. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.
Big ups, Joe.
Yeah.